With Eric and Lyle, it was really difficult to get them to even start talking about negative things that happened in the family, let alone this deep seated, truly nightmarish essay that was normalized in their family from the time that Eric and Lyle were very, very young. Hey y'all, welcome back to Ramblin' Mama. I'm Lisa. Today's video is going to be the next installment of the Menendez brothers. If you didn't already, go back and catch part 1 of the series. I'm going to link it down below. Today's video, we're going to pick up with right after the murder, and we're going to go over the investigation and everything that I can get to right before the first trial. Then the next video, we're going to go over the trials. Just a quick disclaimer, as always, I am not an expert. This is just based on my research and the research of Molly Robichaux. Thank you again, Molly, for all your hard work. Without any further ado, let's get into it. During questioning, Eric was distraught and sobbing, but Lyle did a better job of staying under control and answering questions. But the questioning only lasted 20 minutes because Eric was hysterical. Before the questioning ended, though, the brothers provided police with a timeline of how they spent August 20th, 1989. According to Lyle and Eric, they played tennis that morning in the court behind their home. Then they watched a tennis match on TV before they went shopping at the Beverly Center shopping mall. They said at 5 p.m. they made plans to go with a friend to the Taste of LA, a food festival in Santa Monica. At 8 p.m., Lyle and Eric told investigators they went to the movie theater to see the new James Bond movie, but the line was too long, so they went to see Batman instead. After the movie ended, Lyle and Eric said they then drove to Santa Monica to meet their friend for the festival, but they got lost along the way. Lyle and Eric stopped at a payphone where they phoned another friend and made plans to meet at the Cheesecake Factory. The brothers said they needed to stop at home first to get Eric's fake ID. They told investigators that when they returned home, there was smoke in the house. The responding officers thought that was odd because they didn't see anything like that. Lyle told the investigator that his mother, Kitty, struggled with emotional issues for several years and said she had contemplated suicide before. When the investigator asked Lyle who he thought had murdered his parents, his response was the mob. Because Lyle and Eric were not considered suspects, the police didn't perform a gunshot residue test, which could determine if a person recently fired a weapon. The officers also failed to do a search on the brothers' vehicles where they were storing the murder weapons. 3 days after the murder, Jose and Kitty had their autopsies performed at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. The first wound the pathologist examined was a shotgun wound to Jose's head. The pathologist found soot in the injury, which indicated that whoever shot Jose had the gun pressed right against his head, leaving a burn mark around the wound. Jose was shot twice in his right arm and his left elbow. He was also shot in the left knee. Although these wounds would have bled a lot, none of them would have caused immediate death. The pathologist couldn't determine the order in which the bullets were fired into Jose by his attacker. Kitty's autopsy showed that she had been shot in the left cheek and her head. The pathologist discovered evidence which indicated Kitty's killers had reloaded their weapon. They were able to conclude this because Jose was shot with buckshots only, so the bird shot was a departure from that. Kitty's right thumb was nearly severed, which indicated that she was probably holding up her hand to either try to block against the attacker or to maybe even shield herself from seeing who was shooting her. She also had a gunshot to her left knee and appeared to have been fired from an odd angle. Investigators theorized that this was the final shot fired into Kitty and that it was an attempt to make the double murder look like a mob hit, aka knee-capping or capping someone. On August 25th, 1989, Lyle and Eric held a memorial service for their parents, and they arrived an hour late. On August 28th, 1989, a traditional church service was held for Jose and Kitty in Princeton, New Jersey. Lyle spoke for a half an hour about the love he had for his parents, but Eric was too upset to speak. Only 4 days after the murders, Lyle and Eric began a spending spree using money from their parents' insurance payout. I read two different reports, one saying that initially the brothers received $400,000 and then got an additional $250,000, but in Robert Rand's book, he reported that it was actually $250K, then an additional $250K, but either way, a lot of money. They purchased Rolex watches and money clips totaling $15,000. They wore their brand new watches to Jose and Kitty's funeral services. The value of Jose's estate was $5.7 million, and he also owned 330,000 shares of Live Entertainment. Eventually, it was determined that Lyle and Eric would receive a little over $2 million each after fees and taxes were taken out from their inheritance. After the murders, Lyle and Eric decided that they could no longer stay in Beverly Hills. They told their friends that they feared the mobsters who murdered their parents were also going to come back after them. Jose's company, Live Entertainment, paid over $8,000 for the brothers to stay at the Bel Air Hotel. And while they were there, they rang up a big bill to the tune of $2,000 just on room service. The company also paid for the brothers to have limos and bodyguards. Eventually, Lyle and Eric rented connected apartments in Marina del Rey. Lyle's rent was over $2,000 a month, as was Eric's. Although in today's terms, that sounds very reasonable, but we have to remember that this was 1989. They also put a down payment on a penthouse apartment that they liked, which was going for $999,000, but the financing actually fell through. Their shopping spree continued when Lyle decided that he needed a brand new vehicle. He purchased a gray Porsche 911 Carrera and got rid of his red Alfa Romeo that his parents purchased him as a graduation gift. The cost of the Porsche was $64,000. Eric traded his car in for a brand new Jeep Wrangler. Lyle had always dreamed of owning a restaurant, so he bought Spring Street Cafe in Princeton, New Jersey, and he changed its name to Mr. Buffalo's. Lyle had big plans for Mr. Buffalo's, and he actually wanted to open more locations in Princeton and California. His plan was to open a new location of Mr. Buffalo's every 2 months. However, Lyle allowed his friends to eat for free at the restaurant, and it was poorly managed and they were losing money. Eric tried to sponsor a rock show at the LA Palladium. He gave $40,000 to a partner as his half of the payment, but then the guy just dipped on Eric, taking his money. Then Eric decided that he would try playing professional tennis, so he hired a private coach for $60,000 a year. Eric and his coach traveled extensively and stayed at expensive hotels while Eric was competing. It was Lyle and Eric's extravagant spending that started to arouse the suspicions of investigators. In addition to the spending spree, a friend of Lyle's actually told the police that Lyle had told him that he deleted Kitty's new will, and he had called in a computer expert to ensure that no one could read the erased file. So an investigator interviewed Eric about Kitty and Jose's murder, and this shook Eric to the core, and he went out immediately and made an appointment to see his therapist, Jerome Oziel. At the end of October 1989, Eric went to see his doctor, and that's where he confessed that he and Lyle had killed their parents. He started to go into detail about this, but the doctor had him stop, and he gave Lyle a call, who then rushed to the office. When Lyle arrived, he was furious with Eric. The doctor recorded the sessions that he had with the brothers. Allegedly, Lyle and Eric threatened the doctor to stay quiet. The doctor told the brothers that because they threatened him with violence, he could now break their doctor-patient confidentiality. However, the doctor didn't end the relationship with them there. In the middle of November, investigators interviewed Eric's friend Craig Signorelli, who told investigators that after Jose and Kitty's murder, Eric asked him if he wanted to know how it happened, and Craig knew exactly what Eric meant by it. According to Craig, Eric confessed that after he obtained his fake ID from his car, Lyle met him there with their shotguns. Lyle was supposed to shoot Jose and Eric was supposed to kill Kitty. Craig told the investigators that Eric then told him that they entered the family room and Lyle shot Jose in the head. Eric said he couldn't shoot his mother, who tried to get away. When Kitty tried to escape, Lyle shot her. The police needed Eric's confession, so they asked Craig to wear a wire and talk to Eric, which Craig agreed to do. He asked Eric to meet him for dinner on November 30th. And that's where Eric told Craig that he had actually lied to him, that he and Lyle didn't kill their parents. He completely backpedaled and the conversation didn't turn up any information.
Smith, Judalon, Smith, Smyth.
The investigators finally got their break in March 1990 when a woman named Judalon Smith, who was Dr. Jerome Oziel's lover, spoke to them. She said she overheard a shouting match between Lyle and Eric during one of their sessions in which they argued about their parents' murder and the fact that Eric had told Dr. Oziel. She said that Dr. Oziel told her that he continued to meet with Lyle and Eric because he was trying to piece together their events in their family history which caused them to commit such a heinous crime. Judalon told investigators how her lover, Dr. Oziel, had told her he had every conversation with the brothers recorded. A few days later, the investigators obtained a search warrant for Dr. Oziel's tapes based on the information Judalon told them. Dr. Oziel handed the investigators over 17 audio tapes and several pages of notes detailing the murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez. On March 8th, 1990, Lyle was driving in his car away from the Menendez family home with his friends. Lyle's car was then surrounded by police cruisers, and he and his friends were arrested and taken to Los Angeles County Men's Jail. Eric was arrested after voluntarily returning to the United States from London 3 days later when he was competing in a tennis competition. Both brothers were held without bail while awaiting trial. The LA District Attorney gave a press conference after the Menendez brothers were arrested and said that their motive for the murders was greed. She said the charges of special circumstances were added to the boys' charges, which made them eligible for the death penalty. After the brothers were arrested, investigators continued their search for a physical connection between Lyle and Eric and the murder of their parents. Judalon Smith had told the police she overheard Lyle confess to purchasing the gun in San Diego County. Investigators obtained a list of every store which sold firearms in San Diego and started looking into them to see which was the store where the brothers purchased the guns they used to shoot their mother and father. The investigators contacted a big chain discount store called Big Five and asked the manager for their sales receipts and firearm records. The investigators saw that 2 shotguns, similar to the type used to kill Jose and Kitty Menendez, were purchased on August 18, 1989 by a man by the name of Donovan J. Goodrow. There was a San Diego address listed. The officers contacted the man, Donovan Goodrow, who said he was in New York in August 1989 and that he didn't have a San Diego address. However, the man confirmed that the driver's license number listed on the firearm application was indeed his, but the signature wasn't even close to his. The investigators asked the court for a search warrant to obtain handwriting samples from Lyle and Eric, and that's when they finally had their physical evidence link to the murders. So I want you to imagine for a second the perspective of the defense team. They know this heinous crime just occurred. It's this very well-to-do family that was very well respected and successful and very wealthy. And they're looking at these brothers and trying to understand, aside from greed, the spending spree, the whole like spoiled rich boys kind of thing, why in the world they would possibly do such a thing. The defense team hired an expert, Dr. Vickery, a psychiatrist, to talk to the brothers. Vickery initially shared the sentiment that was circulating in the media, which is these were a couple of spoiled rich boys, and they were basically sociopaths in the sense that they were willing to dispose of their parents in order to get massive financial gain. Lyle was very reluctant to discuss his emotional pain with Dr. Vickery. He was very paranoid. Dr. Vickery said he didn't even take notes when he was with Lyle because he was so worried that he was going to ruin rapport between them. Dr. Vickery noted that Eric was a complete mess. He was having hallucinations. He was seeing his father in his cell. Even after Jose's murder, the emotional abuse that Eric endured was continuing in his head from his father. Oh, by the way, most of this stuff about Dr. Vickery I got from Robert Rand's book. It's called The Menendez Murders. So Dr. Vickery shared a test that he had for his patients. The ones who would fake insanity and psychosis, would talk about the voices in their head. Whereas the ones who were really having a psychotic break and hallucinations like that would talk about the hallucinations like it was really that person or thing in front of them. So in Eric's instance, he would talk about his father as if his father was truly there with him in the cell and not his father's voice that he heard in his head. Something else that started to change Dr. Vickery's mind from the initial assumptions that he made of the spoiled rich kid theory is that both brothers started out praising Jose. They talked about what a wonderful father he was, how much he had accomplished in his life, wanting to continue his legacy, and typically in Dr. Vickery's experience, those who were trying to fabricate some sort of trauma that they endured in order to justify a crime that they committed will start out right away with character assassination about how terrible this person was, how awfully they treated them. But with Eric and Lyle, it was really difficult to get them to even start talking about negative things that happened in the family, let alone this deep-seated, truly nightmarish essay that was normalized in their family from the time that Eric and Lyle were very, very young. Something that broke my heart was that Eric shared with Dr. Vickery that being in jail was a relief because it was the first time he could set his own schedule. And we're gonna get into all the dynamics of the different types of abuse that occurred in the Menendez home when we dive into trial 1. But I'm just giving you a little preliminary lay of the land here. Eric, like I mentioned, was racked with guilt after the murder. It's something that made me think of, if anyone's familiar with Macbeth and how tormented Lady Macbeth became after the murder of Duncan. She began a rapid downward spiral that included hallucinations and not being able to sleep and not having any peace and just tormented by guilt. And that sounded a lot like what Eric was experiencing. Dr. Vickery said at first he couldn't get Eric to talk about anything, but then at some point it was like the dam broke and Eric couldn't stop talking. It was all these years of pent-up abuse and secrets that he needed to talk about. Since Going to prison, Eric struggled to sleep and he had lost 20 pounds since he had been arrested. And you'll see from the pictures, Eric was lean and athletic. I can't imagine what he looked like 20 pounds less. Dr. Vickery prescribed him with a tranquilizer and antidepressant. And in addition to that, Eric was also having anxiety attacks. Apparently, in the 5 days leading up to the murder, Eric had slept for a total of 12 hours. And if you're bad at quick math like I am, I already did the math for you, that's less than 2.5 hours on average. So even after months of Dr. Vickery meeting with the brothers, Leslie Abramson, who was on the defense team representing Eric, still couldn't understand why the brothers killed Kitty. She was starting to get a sense of why they killed Jose, but she still couldn't wrap her head around why kill Kitty. It wasn't until around the 26th meeting that Dr. Vickery had with Eric that they got their first clue about this. 1 week prior to the murders, Eric found out that Kitty had always known about Jose essaying Eric for all those years. It started when Eric was about 5 years old, and Eric at the time of the murder was 18. So upon finding out about this extensive abuse, the lawyers questioned why the brothers didn't reach out for help. And Dr. Vickery thought it was because how psychologically disoriented they were from the years of abuse, and they lacked in very basic, essential confidence. Dr. Vickery estimated that Eric's maturity was somewhere between 8 and 12 years old, and that Lyle's was somewhere between 12 and 14. And keep in mind, Eric was 18, Lyle was 21. Lyle eventually started opening up to Dr. Vickery as well, following Eric's lead. Unfortunately, there would later become controversies surrounding Dr. Vickery as well. And there was also some debate around what of his notes could be included in the second trial, but we'll get to that when we get to the trials in the next episode. And the first trial in particular is mind-blowing in terms of the information that's revealed. I promise you, you're not going to want to miss it. Hit like and subscribe and make sure your bell notifications are on, and I'll see y'all next time.